The desperate choice. The rain fell in sheets across downtown Seattle, turning the sidewalks into treacherous rivers that reflected the neon glow of late-night businesses. Victoria Hayes clutched her worn leather bag tighter against her chest. As she hurried through the storm, her mind reeling from the conversation she'd just had with Dr. Williams at Seattle General Hospital. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if we're lucky, the cardiologist had said, his weathered face grave behind wire-rimmed glasses. Sophia's condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. Without the surgery, I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do. Victoria's younger sister, barely 19 and full of dreams about becoming a marine biologist, was dying. The experimental heart procedure that could save her life cost $300,000, money that Victoria, a high school art teacher making $35,000 a year, would never have. She'd already maxed out her credit cards, been denied by every bank in the city, and even started a crowdfunding campaign that had raised a measly $2,000. Lost in her desperate thoughts, Victoria stepped into the crosswalk without checking for traffic. The screech of brakes on wet asphalt pierced the night air, followed by the sickening crunch of metal as she collided with the hood of a sleek black Bentley. Her bag flew open, scattering student artwork and unpaid bills across the gleaming pavement. Like confetti of her failures, Victoria hit the ground hard, her palms scraping against the rough concrete as her knee twisted beneath her. Through the pain and disorientation, she heard the heavy slam of a car door and the measured footsteps of expensive shoes approaching. "Are you completely insane?" The voice was deep, cultured, and filled with controlled fury. "Do you have any idea what you've just done to my car?" Victoria looked up through the rain streaming down her face to see a man who seemed to have stepped out of a magazine spread. Tall and imposing, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair slicked back and eyes the color of Arctic ice. His charcoal wool coat probably cost more than Victoria made in 6 months, and he wore it like armor against the storm that seemed to part around him. "I'm sorry," Victoria whispered, scrambling to collect her waterlogged papers while trying to ignore the throbbing in her knee. "I didn't see your car. I'll pay for the damage. You'll pay." The man's laugh was cold and sharp. He crouched down, his penetrating gaze taking in her hospital visitor's badge, her rain-soaked clothes, and the scattered rejection letters from loan companies floating in the puddles around them. "Tell me, Miss Hayes, Victoria Hayes. Tell me, Miss Hayes, how exactly does a high school teacher plan to pay for repairs to a $300,000 automobile?" He picked up one of the papers, a medical bill with Sophia's name on it, and studied it with the intensity of a predator examining prey. "Interesting. Heart surgery for Sophia Hayes. Your sister, I presume?" Victoria's blood turned to ice water. Who are you?" The man straightened to his full height, which seemed to tower over her even more intimidatingly than before. "Adrian Stone. And you, Miss Hayes, have just provided me with a very interesting opportunity." Even through her shock and pain, Victoria recognized the name. Stone Industries owned half the Seattle skyline, and Adrian Stone himself was legendary for his ruthless business tactics and reclusive lifestyle. Forbes had called him the Ghost of Wall Street, a man who could destroy companies with a phone call but hadn't been photographed in public for over 2 years. "Get in the car," Adrian said, extending a hand that she noticed remained perfectly steady despite the chaos around them. "We need to discuss your sister's future." "I don't think that's a good idea." Victoria's instincts screamed at her to run, but her injured knee made escape impossible. Adrian's smile was predatory and calculating. "Your sister needs surgery within 3 weeks, or she dies. You've been denied by every financial institution in the city. Your crowdfunding has raised exactly $2,347, and you're about to lose your apartment because you spent your rent money on her medication." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were reading stock prices rather than dissecting her life. "I can save her, Victoria, but only if you're willing to pay my price." The rain continued to fall around them, but Victoria felt as if she were drowning in something far more dangerous than water. "What do you want from me?" Adrian's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, like a chess master who had just achieved checkmate. "Everything." The hospital vigil, the fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai Hospital, cast an unforgiving glare across the maternity ward, where Victoria Sterling lay propped against starched white pillows, her hands protectively cradling her swollen belly. At 34, she should have been glowing with the anticipation of impending motherhood, but instead, her auburn hair was matted with perspiration, her green eyes rimmed red from a sleepless night of contractions that had mercifully subsided. With medication, the irony wasn't lost on her that she was supposed to be in family court this morning, finalizing the end of her marriage to tech billionaire Jonathan Sterling. Instead, she was fighting to keep their unborn child safe, while machines monitored every heartbeat, every flutter of movement that reminded her she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. Dr. Amanda Ross entered the room with the quiet authority of someone who had delivered both good and devastating news countless times. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her kind brown eyes held the weight of experience as she reviewed Victoria's chart. "How are we feeling this morning, Victoria?" Dr. Ross asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. "The contractions seem to have stabilized. Physically, I'm better," Victoria replied, her voice hoarse from stress and exhaustion. "But mentally, I should be in court right now. My entire future is being decided without me." Before Dr. Ross could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Nathan Cross, Victoria's divorce attorney, stood in the doorway, his usually impeccable suit wrinkled and his silver hair disheveled. The expression on his weathered face made Victoria's heart skip. "Nathan, what's wrong? Did the hearing go badly?" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with unusual gravity. "Victoria, I need you to sit down. Well, you already are, but I need you to prepare yourself for some shocking news." "The divorce is final?" she asked, though something in his tone suggested it was far worse than that. "There is no divorce, Victoria." Nathan's voice was gentle but firm. "Jonathan died of a massive heart attack in his office at 3 this morning." The words hit her like a physical blow. The monitoring equipment beside her bed began beeping frantically as her heart rate spiked. Dr. Ross immediately moved to check the readings, her professional mask slipping to reveal concern. "That's impossible," Victoria whispered. "He's only 43. He exercises every day. His last physical was perfect." "I'm afraid it's true. The paramedics couldn't revive him. His assistant found him slumped over his desk around 2:30. Nathan pulled out his phone, showing her a news alert from the Financial Wire services. The stock market opened down 12% on Sterling Tech shares. Victoria's world tilted on its axis. For all the pain Jonathan had caused her with his affair, for all the bitter months of separation and legal battles, he was still the father of her child, still the man she had loved for 7 years before everything fell apart. "But Bianca," she started, referring to Jonathan's 26-year-old mistress who had torn their marriage apart. "She was so confident about today. She kept posting on social media about finally getting what she deserved." Nathan's expression darkened. "About that, Victoria. The hearing this morning wasn't cancelled. It became something else entirely. A preliminary, probate hearing, and Bianca showed up with quite a story," Dr. Ross interjected, studying the monitors with growing alarm. "Mr. Cross, I need to ask you to keep this brief. Victoria's blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and stress could trigger premature labor." "What story?" Victoria demanded, ignoring the doctor's warning. What did that woman do? She claims to have a will, a handwritten document supposedly signed by Jonathan last week, leaving her everything: the house, the company, the offshore accounts, everything. Nathan's jaw tightened. She's painting herself as the grieving fiancée, saying Jonathan was planning to marry her as soon as your divorce was final. Victoria felt bile rise in her throat. Even in death, Bianca was trying to steal her life, trying to erase 7 years of marriage and reduce her to nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. That's insane. Jonathan would never... She stopped herself. The man who had betrayed their vows, who had flaunted his affair publicly, who had served her with divorce papers while she was carrying his child. Would that man really be above writing her out of his will entirely? "Victoria, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Nathan said, his voice taking on the tone he used in depositions. "There's something else, something that changes everything." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the distant sounds of hospital life beyond the walls. Victoria looked between her lawyer and her doctor, both of whom seemed to be holding their breath. "What is it, Nathan?" Jonathan's longtime attorney, Thomas Reed, was at the hearing this morning, and he had some very interesting things to say about wills, about Bianca, and about what your husband really knew before he died. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed brighter, the room smaller. Victoria's hands tightened instinctively around her belly as she prepared for whatever revelation would reshape her world once again. The wedding trap. The interior of Adrian's Bentley felt like a mobile fortress, all black leather and bulletproof glass that transformed the storm outside into a distant whisper. Victoria sat rigidly on the edge of her seat, acutely aware of how her damp clothes were staining the pristine upholstery, while Adrian poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter with movements that were almost ritualistic in their precision. "Your sister is beautiful," Adrian said suddenly, sliding a photograph across the small table between them. Victoria's heart lurched as she recognized Sophia's face, a recent photo taken at the hospital that she definitely hadn't given him. Such vibrant eyes. It would be tragic if they lost their light. "How did you get this?" Victoria's voice cracked as she realized the depth of his surveillance. "I make it my business to know about people who interest me." Adrian settled back in his seat, studying her with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "And you, Victoria Hayes, are exactly what I've been searching for." The car glided through Seattle's empty streets toward the exclusive Bellevue district, where mansions hid behind towering gates and manicured hedges. Victoria tried to focus on the conversation, but her mind kept circling back to Sophia's pale face in that hospital bed, to the monitor showing her weakening heartbeat. "I'll pay for everything," Adrian continued, his voice taking on that hypnotic quality that made her skin crawl. "The surgery, the recovery, the best cardiac specialists in the world. Sophia will not only survive, she'll thrive. College tuition, living expenses, whatever she needs for the rest of her life." Victoria's mouth went dry. "What do you want in return?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them, like a guillotine blade. "A real marriage, Victoria, not some paper arrangement. You would live in my home, bear my name, fulfill every duty that position entails." The car pulled through massive iron gates, topped with security cameras, approaching a mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. Gothic architecture loomed against the stormy sky, all sharp angles and dark windows that seemed to watch their approach. "You're talking about buying me," Victoria whispered. "I'm offering you a solution." Adrian's tone remained clinical, businesslike. "Sophia dies without my help. With it she lives, and you live very comfortably, as my wife." 3 days later, Victoria stood before an ornate mirror in what Adrian's housekeeper, Mrs. Caldwell, called the bridal preparation room. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace that must have cost more than Victoria's annual salary, but it felt like a burial shroud against her skin. Mrs. Caldwell, a severe woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, adjusted the pearl necklace around Victoria's throat with movements that felt more like shackling than adorning. "Mr. Stone has exquisite taste," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Has he done this before?" Victoria asked, meeting the older woman's eyes in the mirror. Something flickered across Mrs. Caldwell's face, a moment of what might have been pity before the professional mask slipped back into place. "There was a previous Mrs. Stone, yes, Camille was her name. Lovely girl, very much like you." "What happened to her?" Mrs. Caldwell's hands stilled on the necklace clasp. "She left, miss. Found the lifestyle too restrictive." The ceremony took place in Adrian's private chapel, a cold stone room filled with white roses that seemed more funeral than festive. No friends, no family, just two witnesses Victoria had never met, and a justice of the peace who looked uncomfortable with the entire proceedings. Adrian stood at the altar in a black tuxedo that made him look more like a beautiful devil than a groom. When Victoria walked down the aisle, his eyes tracked her movement with the satisfaction of a hunter watching prey walk into his trap. "Do you, Adrian Stone, take Victoria Hayes to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the justice of the peace asked. "I do." Adrian's voice was steady, possessive. "And do you, Victoria Hayes, take Adrian Stone to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Victoria thought of Sophia, already showing improvement after just 3 days of treatment. She thought of the promise she'd made to her parents before they died. "To protect her little sister no matter what, I do," she whispered, sealing her fate. When Adrian kissed her to seal their union, his lips were cold against hers, and she could swear she tasted metal, like blood or chains. Part 3. The Gilded Prison. Victoria's new life began with rules she hadn't known existed until she broke them. The Stone Mansion was a labyrinth of restrictions disguised as luxury, rooms she wasn't allowed to enter, phone calls that had to be pre-approved, and a schedule that dictated her every movement from dawn to midnight. "Mrs. Stone will take her morning coffee in the sunroom at precisely 8, Mrs. Caldwell informed her on the first morning, as if Victoria were a guest in someone else's life, rather than supposedly the mistress of the house. "Mr. Stone prefers his wife to be dressed appropriately for breakfast. The blue Chanel suit would be suitable." Victoria's own clothes had mysteriously disappeared, replaced by a wardrobe of designer pieces that felt like costumes. Everything fit perfectly. Another reminder of how thoroughly Adrian had studied her before making his offer. The breakfast routine was surreal. Adrian sat at the head of a dining table that could seat 20, reading financial reports on his tablet while Victoria picked at eggs Benedict she had no appetite for. He spoke to her in the same tone he might use with a business associate, polite, distant, occasionally asking about her adjustment period, as if she were a new employee rather than his wife. "Sophia called this morning," Victoria ventured. "During their third breakfast together. She wanted to thank you for your sister's medical team reports. Her progress is excellent," Adrian interrupted, without looking up from his tablet. "Dr. Harrison believes the surgery will be completely successful. You should be pleased." It wasn't a conversation. It was a status report. Victoria realized that in Adrian's world, even gratitude was a transaction to be managed and controlled. The true nature of her prison became clear during her first week when she tried to visit Sophia at the hospital. The car, a silver Mercedes with a driver she didn't recognize, had pulled up to Seattle General right on schedule, but when Victoria reached for the door handle, it wouldn't budge. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Stone," the driver said through the partition. Mr. Stone's instructions were very specific. Hospital visits are scheduled for Wednesdays and Saturdays only between 2 and 4 p.m. with security escort. Victoria felt panic claw at her throat. But she's my sister. I need to see her. Perhaps you should discuss the schedule with Mr. Stone when he returns from New York. That evening, Victoria confronted Adrian in his study, a room that looked more like a command center with multiple screens showing stock prices, security camera feeds, and what appeared to be surveillance reports on various individuals. "I want to see my sister whenever I choose," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Adrian looked up from his computers with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "Sophia is receiving the best possible care. Excessive visits would disrupt her recovery schedule. She's scared and alone. She needs me. She needs to focus on getting well. Emotional dependency is counterproductive to healing." Adrian's tone remained clinical, but Victoria caught something darker beneath the surface. "You signed a contract, Victoria. Your role now is to be my wife, not Sophia's caretaker." That night, alone in the master bedroom that felt more like a gilded cage, Victoria discovered Adrian's first wife hadn't simply left, as Mrs. Caldwell had claimed. Hidden behind a loose panel in the walk-in closet, she found a collection of photographs, dozens of pictures of a beautiful blonde woman who bore an eerie resemblance to Victoria herself. But it wasn't just the physical similarity that made Victoria's blood run cold. It was the progression she saw in the photos. Camille smiling brightly in early pictures, then gradually becoming more subdued, more hollow-eyed, until the final photos showed a woman who looked like a ghost of her former self. At the bottom of the collection was a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Billionaire's wife vanishes, foul play suspected." The article was dated just 6 months ago.